Hey, welcome back to the Conscious Environment Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. I am super excited because this week I got a chance to sit down with E.K Powell, aka What's Good English, and he is a linguist that does videos and different content on Black English, and he talks about whether or not it is a language. Spoiler alert, it's definitely a language. So we get a chance to sit down and just kind of hash out what's the differences between Black English, like what makes it a language, what makes a language, what's a creole, what are different dialects, what do all these words mean when it comes to this stuff. So I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation because I had a great time sitting down with him. Okay, so let's just start it off. What's your name? What do you do? And how can people find you?
So E.K Powell is the name. I go by What's Good English on my socials. So that's TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And I talk a lot about language stuff. I sort of expanded into doing like more types of content just because it's better for me and my mental health to like not only focus on like that one little area, and it's more fun that way as well. Like, I don't know if you've seen like some of my recent stuff. I'm talking like more about like masculinity and stuff like that. Also stuff about like language learning in general. Like, I'm super passionate about like learning new things, especially languages, learning French right now. And like I started that whole new series where I just talk about a different like show that you could use to help you learn whatever language you're trying to learn every single week. So I've been doing that since the start of the year. It's super fun. I gotta put together those episode actually after this, so that should be pretty cool. But yeah, pretty much anything about language, and you might see some other random stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, that's how I came across you almost a year ago now, probably just about a year ago now, because I started in February last year. And as I was just, perusing the app, I found this guy. And it was a really eye-opening like moment for me because I was at the time I was reading Talking Back, Talking Black. By John McWhorter. Do you know that book?
Yeah, I've read that one a couple times.
Yeah. So I've
read it like at least 2 or 3 times.
Yeah. So I was in the middle of reading that book and having basically an existential crisis. And then I was coming across your videos and some show's videos, and I was like, whoa, hold on. Like there's grammar behind, like, this is real. Like it was just really validating to realize that like I didn't speak wrong, or I wasn't I wasn't incorrect my whole life, and things that I did or the way that I talked when I was a kid that I kind of like beat out of myself to conform to people, basically to avoid getting bullied. 10 years later, 15 years later, I'm watching a video that you did and I'm like, wait, that has a name for it? Like, there's a reason why I say it like that, and there's a name for it, and there's this. So, early on in the app, and there was a lot of just like just validating things that you had said that I think a lot of people in the Black community have a similar experience, especially when it comes to Black English. So we oftentimes talk about like Black English or AAV, and I guess I'll ask you, which phrase do you want to use? Is it different in your opinion or not? Like, is Black English different from AAV?
Like, to me, so all right, so I actually had this conversation about like the official term, like what should we be calling this, with speech language pathologist Dr. Deanna Hearn. Actually, there's like I think it's like an hour-long interview that I did with her that's up on my YouTube channel. You can see it. But the official term is African American English or African American language. So like it sort of removes the vernacular entirely because like technically African American English and African American vernacular English are like two different things. It's like vernacular is just like pretty much just like the way that a specific person is speaking the language and everything. But like African American English is like specific to like this thing that exists that is Black English or whatever. But like, don't get on anybody for using whatever terms you want to call it. You know, African American English, African American vernacular English, AAVE, Black English. You want to call it Ebonics, whatever. Like, I mean, it's still referring to like in the general, you know, person's mind. Like it's referring to something specific. So like, I'm not going to get on somebody for not knowing the technical term if, you know, they're not, you know, involved in like in the field or anything like that. They're not doing any of the study or anything like that. It's better that you know it and you respect it, you know, than you calling it by whatever like the technical people want to call it.
Yeah, through different academic things that I've read, I've literally just seen it both ways. I've seen all three of those in different papers, and I was like, I mean, it's kind of whatever, sort of whatever you're feeling at the time. But I had thought that I'm glad that you have pointed that out. So what is, like you said that you were taking out vernacular out of that. So it would be AAE, right? African American English. Why? What is vernacular? Because I don't understand what that word means.
So vernacular is just like the way I describe it. It's just the way that you specifically express yourself. Like the words like that you use specifically that are specific to you and how you express yourself. Like my vernacular can match someone else's vernacular, you know, or it can be like really similar to someone else, but like it's just us like out there like, you know, expressing ourselves. Whereas when we talk about African American English, we're talking about like a much bigger umbrella, like along the lines of things that appear within all these different variants that is, you know, Black English, African American English.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. So vernacular English, whatever. In whatever way would be like a personal thing, and then AAE is like the big umbrella, the big tent.
Yeah, that's sort of how I rationalized it within my way of thinking. There's probably someone else like that could say, actually, vernacular is something else. But like part of it is like all language is vernacular. There's a vernacular element to whatever language you're speaking. So like the vernacular doesn't need to be there. Because, like I said, all language is vernacular. It's just adding something specific to like a person or like a really like small group of people when you're adding that vernacular in.
So, how do you refer to English? Like, so I've heard standard English as a term, but I haven't heard, I guess, much like anything different. So, is standard English the correct terminology for,
so
I guess, everything else? I don't even know how to phrase what I'm trying to phrase. Like what Black people don't speak.
I know what you're talking about. So like I stopped using the term standard English. Like if you go through like you'll see early on I was using standard English, and then I stopped using it like about a year and a half ago, and I just always either say like general American English, mainstream American English, or I'll just say American English, like because like there's an idea that there's a standard, there's an idea that a standard exists, but when people talk about, you know, standard English or any other language, standard Italian, standard, actually it's weird because like the official Italian dialect is standard Italian, like that's what they actually call it, so it kind of gets to skate on that technicality, but like, you know, standard Spanish, you know, whatever, like there's the idea of a standard, like which basically means that, oh, this is what the people, you know, this is what the majority of people sound like, you know, this is what the people on the news and on the TV sound like, this is like the like more generally socially acceptable dialect or variant of whatever language is what people consider the standard. But the thing is, the standard is something that nobody speaks. Like the standard only exists inside of textbooks, and that is just because a bunch of people got together and decided, okay, well, this is how this word should be pronounced, and this is how this is how this sentence should be formed, regardless of all the other variations on certain pronunciations and certain sentences and stuff like that. And part of this, the big thing that everybody has to realize is like there's not a standard language from which everything deviates from. Like there are millions of variants of, like every little language. I mean, like children do not learn or children do not speak the, exact same way that, their parents speak, or even like their brothers and sisters that are like closely in like some of the same age range speaks. They all have their own little spin on it. It could be like a little microscopic spin, but like there are all these different variants of language, and like the standard is born out of the variance. Somebody just looks at all these little differences and says, okay, we're going to ignore these differences, or a lot of these, variants all say it this way. So that's what we're going to consider as the standard, even though like other variants exist, other pronunciations exist, other grammatical structures exist. So the standard is born from the variance, not the other way around.
Hey, I like that. So from learning honestly through your videos, especially like your YouTube page, one of the things that you spoke about, so I guess I'll end up bringing up two things, but the first thing I want to bring up is grammar. So that was one of the first things that I learned from you, and honestly was showing like anybody I could all of your videos because I was like, our grammar isn't wrong. Like this isn't slang. There's a reason for it. Like there's grammatical laws, right, or rules, or that come along with it. So between American English and Black English, there are a bunch of differences. Is there anything like off the top of your head that you can think of, like as an example, that's like, oh, these are way different?
Yeah, so like one of the big differences between African American English and like general American English is use of double negatives, right? Like in general American English, in the English textbooks that you get in school, they'll tell you that negatives cancel each other out. So if you say that's not never going to happen, that means that something is going to happen in just regular old, generic English. African American English doesn't work like that. Our negatives strengthen, like our one negative will strengthen the previous negative. So it's not never going to happen means it's like really not going to happen. So that's one of the differences, and double negatives are a thing in many different languages. Like I'm learning French right now. You have to use a double negative to negate pretty much anything in that language. Same thing with Spanish. Like I speak Spanish, you say like no tengo nada, which is I don't have nothing all the time. That means I don't have anything, but the actual like direct translation is I don't have nothing. It's like that's one. I mean, loads of languages use double negatives in that exact same way, where like the successive negatives strengthen the original negative. Another one is, for example, we have a habitual tense in African American English. We can say like, oh yeah, they be standing on that corner, which means they habitually stand on the corner. Like, oh yeah, they be on that corner at 8. That means I look out my window at that corner around 8 o'clock, they probably going to be there. Like, there might be some days where they ain't there, but they most likely are going to be there. And then we have like some extra like stresses and ways to play around with the habitual tense. For example, like I can say, oh man, they stay on that corner. That means whenever I'm looking out my window, they're always there. Or I can say something like, oh, yeah, they steady be on that corner, like trying to, or actually, no, that's a bad example. I can say something like, oh, yeah, man, I'm steady on this French grind right now. So, like, steady is, like, one of my favorite, like, uses in, like, the habitual tense, because, like, when you say it, it's got, like, an implied termination. Like, I'm not going to be on this French grind forever, but I'm steady on that French grind right now. Eventually, like, I'm going to get to a point where, like, I don't need to be grinding it as hard. And I will no longer, like, be, at that same level. It's got that implied I don't stay. I'm not necessarily staying on the French grind, but I'm steady on the French grind. And like people that don't know, it's just like, what the hell is this dude talking about? But like, you know it.
Yeah, I mean
yeah,
that's so
and you
funny.
can say it wrong.
Like I read through the comments of like the different there's a bunch of different linguists like on TikTok or YouTube that talk about this topic, and it's funny because I kind of dive into the comments every once in a while. You don't want to stay in there too long, but dive into the comments and it's like there's so many people that have no idea what you
Yeah,
said, and I'm like, oh, I guess it is like a native language because I didn't have to translate. I immediately knew what you were talking about the entire time. And it was surprising to me that people didn't know. Like a fun little anecdote from my life. And I kind of want you to touch on this too, is repetition of words. So like,
right.
my it was a couple of years ago. My wife was buying a cake for my dad for his birthday, and my mom was giving her instructions. So my mom says, "Get him a chocolate cake," and my wife goes, "Do you want a chocolate cake or like a chocolate cake?" And my mom still to this day like dies telling that story. And she was like, a chocolate cake. And so they got the triple chocolate with the with the chocolate
Yep.
chips on it and the drizzle on it. But it was funny because we knew what that meant, and I didn't know that was a thing. I was like, that's how everybody talk, but it's not. That's not how everybody
Yeah.
talk. So can you explain, I guess,
Yeah.
like the mechanism that's going on when people use like repetition like that?
Yeah. So it's called epixeusis. So that's the official like linguistics term for like repetition of a word. Like it's I keep forgetting if it's like a form of reduplication or it's like something aside from reduplication. But yeah, so it's like repeating the word twice to like further specify like what you want, to like clarify it from like maybe a slang phrase back into like the general usage phrase, or vice versa. Like, or to like stress something like, yo, I want a chocolate cake. Like, yo, that thing better be having like all the chocolate in the world better be on this cake. Any chocolate option they got in the shop, it better be on that cake. On that cake, chocolate. That's what that's doing there. It's like either enforcing something or like clarifying something, into something that, we both know.
Right. Yeah. That's a cake I'd pass on. No. You got to have a double chocolate cake. You do. You
Yeah, I
absolutely
want
do.
all the chocolate.
all the chocolate. So because that our grammar is so different and it's noticeably different to American English, I guess at this point. It's noticeably different. We often have something called code switching in the Black community.
Right.
So it's like Black folk grew up bilingual at this point. Like we switch back and forth almost seamlessly. And I was watching a video that you did talking about a Netflix movie. And I forget what country they were from, but I think it was like immigrants, and
Yeah.
the characters were switching in and out of English in their native language, and you were talking about how they were doing it for emphasis, or like they were kind of code switching in that moment. So, what is code? What is code switching, and do you see it in just Black English? Do you see it like all over the world? Like what is it?
Yeah, so code switching happens all over the world. So code switching specifically, just like looking at what is code switching, it's like the basic definition of code switching is just switching between two or more languages or two or more different versions of the same language in a conversation. So that could be something like where, we go from general English to African American English. That could be like somebody raised bilingual with English and Spanish going in between English and Spanish, with people that have both of those codes. That could be using Spanglish, even. It happens all over the world. For example, like if you if you live in like Catalonia, like that area of Spain where you got like Barcelona and all that stuff. So like the official language of Catalonia is Catalan, but the official language of Spain is Spanish. So there's a ton of people that will switch in between both of those languages, like to either accommodate somebody or, you know, maybe that's just how they naturally grow up. So the show I was talking about in that video was a South African show. South Africa is like, I think it's 11 different official languages.
Yeah, I thought it was even higher, like 18 or 19. It's something very high. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people grow up in that, you know, hyper multilingual environment, you know, where, you know, any given person's got like at least 3 languages under their belt minimum, you know, or more. And you're just switching, you know, from one language to the other language. Like that's code switching. There are different reasons that people code switch. You know, it could be because, you know, you just grow up and it's natural to switch between, you know, a few different languages because that's just how you speak, you know, just like Spanglish, you know, using Spanglish is a form of code switching. It's a fun form of code switching too. There'll be situations that come up where it's like, you can't remember the word that you need to say. So you just like turn an English word into a Spanglish word. Like I would say like, oh, like, yeah, man, we're just like, estamos talkando right now, you know, like everybody knows, like, oh, okay, dope. You know, or it can go like another way, like something I say all the time, like on accident, I'll be like, oh, I got to grab like 6 or 7 videos this weekend. You know, that's like grab, like is from like the Spanish word grabar, which means to record. Like I don't know how, like for some reason, like my switches got crossed in my head and like my brain will reach for the Spanish word sometimes instead of like the English word, but like that's still a form of code switching. But people also code switch to, you know, aside from trying to accommodate somebody that doesn't have, you know, the other code that they could possibly switch to, because there's some sort of a power dynamic issue. Maybe they want to avoid some sort of stigma that's attached to speaking a specific language or a specific version of that language. Or, you know, they think they're going to be judged for doing that, or they're trying to, you know, leave a better impression or something like that. And oftentimes with African American English, that's the form of code switching that we're talking about. So when we say we have to code switch, we're referring to not only the act, but also the reason that we're doing that act. But I want to make it clear that like code switching is like just going between like different languages or different versions of languages, like in a conversation, or choosing to switch from one code to another code to like, accommodate somebody without that specific code.
Right. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I didn't realize that it was just, you know, honestly switching between the languages. I thought that it was specific to the same language, but what you said makes a lot of sense. I didn't think about like how Spanish comes back to English. Like my a good buddy of mine, he always says like, "Do you want to go look at TV?" Like the sentence, like it kind of hits your ears like a little weird. Like, do I want to look at TV? And he goes, oh, and, you know, watch it, whatever, man. You know what I'm trying to say. And it's like, it's almost like those like wires get crossed in his head. Like he just kind of direct translating from Spanish in order to ask me something. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like a lot of African American English speakers have learned to code switch out of necessity. And there seems to be a lot of roots in. So some of the things that I've seen or read is that the grammar that we use in African American English is actually borrowed from other languages because of the time period in which we developed that language. Right. I've always heard like kind of Scottish or like Welsh or Irish, especially with like if you ever get a chance to, it's a little heartbreaking, but if you ever get a chance to listen to the interviews of people who were in the early 19th century, of people who were born enslaved and lived most of their life enslaved, they have kind of this strange accent. Like it's not
Yeah.
a Southern accent. It's like almost an Irish accent. And it's kind of in between there. But I just want you to speak to that for a moment. Like, do we borrow rules from other languages? Is that how we got here?
Yeah, most definitely. So I just recently did a video, like I think a month ago or something like that, where somebody had sent me a video of this YouTuber that talks about the Irish language, and she mentioned in the video that the habitual be in African American English and the one in Irish English, or that we have ours, like most likely from interactions between like the Irish like servants and the enslaved Africans in the Caribbean and in the Americas as well. Because the Irish language itself has that habitual tense, and they sort of hacked it into their version of English called Hiberno English. And we're in close proximity to them, and most likely got it from them. And like I said in the video, and now it's not me saying it as well. Doctor, it's like John Rickford, he wrote like a few books on African American English. He wrote like the textbook African American Vernacular English. But he said like that is the most likely theory. But also like most likely like not like not 100%. I mean, because it's hard to tell. Like you can't go back in time to that one point in history and be like, this is where it happened. Because if you look at a language like Yoruba, there's also a habitual tense in Yoruba. So like it could have been we hacked it ourselves. Like it's probably from the Irish. Also like different expressions that we have are from the Irish or from like other languages. For example, like in Cockney slang, where you have bread and honey means money, like, and then they'll often say like, oh, I need to get some bread when they're talking about I need to get some money. And black folks been talking about, oh yeah, man, I don't got no bread on me right now, for a long time, right? Like, like it's most likely, from some of the poor British folks that were sent over here, that because that particular accent and that Cockney rhyming slang was associated with the lower class folks that would have just been shipped off to the Americas to work and do whatever that we were working in more close proximity with. So a lot of what we have like is borrowed and just like like put together and has just solidified over years to become what it is now. Going back to what I was talking about earlier about all these different variations that we have in the habitual tense, like those variations, at least to my knowledge, do not exist, for example, in Hiberno English. Like there is not an equivalent of they stay on the corner or something like that. So it's like we have continued to, like our version of English has continued refining over the years to be what it is.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And you've brought this up a bunch. If you do any reading about the language, you often hear this a lot. What's the deal with the word be? Like every time I hear people be like, that's the big difference. It's the word be. And I kind of get it, but I mostly don't get it. So can you?
It's tough, man. It's rough to nail down. I mean, sometimes it means just like be. Like sometimes it is just like a sub for is. Sometimes it's got like extra stuff involved with it. Like sometimes it's got habitual stuff involved with it. Sometimes it's the exact equivalent. Like that's in mainstream English. Like it's a hard one to nail down. It's really something that you only really have when the language is in you. Like you don't necessarily have to be a native speaker, but like you have to like reach fluency, like true real deal fluency, just like if you were trying to learn any other language in existence in order to like actually get it right.
Right. Yeah. So yes, that's like the one thing whenever there's kind of a sticking point. And you said it earlier that the habitual tense is unique to, as far as like Black English versus American English, it's unique to Black English.
Right.
right?
Right, right.
And the writer I was reading was saying like that is like clear indication that this is its own language. It has its own separate grammatical rules that you can't break. And we always hear you were doing a series for a little while about it wasn't just like Super Bowl commercials, but it was like commercials. And you were like, these
Yeah.
people like trying to do like African American English, and it's clear that you didn't have any native speakers in the room because the grammar is wrong. Like you listen to it and you're like, there's something wrong with this. But I've also heard African American English called two other things, and I'm curious about your opinion of them. I think I know the one, but I've heard them call. I've heard it called slang, and I've heard it called a creole. And I just want your opinion on those two. I think I know your opinion on slang, but I'm curious about your opinion on it being a creole.
Yeah. Clearly not just slang. As far as it being a Creole, I mean, yeah. So I think some of the show talked about this some as well. It's like, these are like further specifications that you can. They're like little adjectives that you can put on a language. At the end of the day, it's still a language. Like if you look up Creole, if you look up Pidgin, if you look up dialect in the dictionary, all of those definitions start with something like a form of language. Like it's a form of language, meaning it's a language first. And then like we're specifically talking about, okay, well, this language has come about because it's like mixing some elements from this language over here and some from this language over here. And then people, started speaking it as, its own like language. Like, for example, you get a Creole when you have like groups of people that all don't speak the same language coming together and they just sort of make it work, and they kind of like fashion like a way of making themselves understood out of their various different languages. And then those people have children, and those children grow up speaking that pidgin language as their native language. And that is what becomes a Creole. Like English itself is a Creole. It is one of the Creoles of Creoles. Like it started, English and German started like as roughly the same language, and like they both diverged, and people added in a bunch of French stuff and a bunch of Latin stuff and then other stuff from like other communities and stuff like that into English, and it has continued to progress. Like the thing is, like it's so big now that nobody wants to call it a Creole, but that it still fits that definition. So, and like there's a form of respect when you call something just a language by itself without adding all these extra little adjectives and stuff like that to it. And like normally, like I wouldn't really have a problem with it, but when people try to say, "Oh, that's a dialect or something," it's like they're trying to take something away from it. When they're trying to say like African American English is just a dialect, it's like you're trying to cheapen it a little bit. So I don't particularly like referring to it as a Creole or as a dialect or anything like that. Like if we want to talk about origins, yeah, it has like Creole type of origins, but at the end of the day, like it's still a language.
Yeah, exactly. I am still kind of stuck on learning that Creole is a thing, not the name of something. Like I grew up in America, and I was like, in Louisiana, they speak Creole. But I'm learning now that they speak a Creole, and it actually might have a name. In Jamaica, they speak a pidgin, but it might actually have a different a different name. Or do they? Is it for those like specific examples? Is it interchangeable? Like, is that what they call it? Or is there something else like that? A native listening to this would be like, "Come on, dude."
I mean, they all have names. So, for example, they say like Haitian Creole. I mean, like that's just the name of the language. Like Haitian Creole, like technically has not been a Creole for a long time. They've been like that's just the language that they speak over there. It just has that title. Right. So it's like it's. Sometimes the title just solidifies, and you just call it Creole or something like that because like they didn't choose to call it something else, or that title of Creole just solidified into it, even though it's like at the full on language stage.
Right. So I guess we've already answered like what I was going to say. So in the, I guess, great debate of is African American English a language, we would say yes, it is its own language.
Yeah, clearly. It's clearly a language. It is clearly a language. Like, like you can put whatever modifier you want to on it, but like as I said, if you look it up in the dictionary, like all those little modifiers melt away and it starts with it's a language, it's specific to either these people or this region or whatever, but like it's still a language. Like there's a level of respect that's not there for African American English that is there for like other variants or something like that. For example, if I said, I speak Mexican Spanish, like everybody understands that it's like, okay, yeah, it's the Spanish spoken in Mexico, and like the Spanish spoken in Mexico is different from the Spanish spoken in like Puerto Rico or Argentina or Colombia or something like that. Right. There's that level of respect. Like, people look up on a map and they're like, okay, well, the people in Spain, there are people like way over here, and then there's people way over here. So obviously there would be some differences and stuff like that in between those two languages. But like, there are more ways to get differences in language that don't involve geography. For example, like Black folks not being able to, buy houses in certain areas, being relegated to certain areas and relegated to certain jobs, and not being able to interact, with white folks. Like if you do that, if you keep people that have one version of English away from people who speak another version of English, you will in fact create another dialect, in that exact same manner. Which is what happened with us. Like a lot of the modifications and solidifications that happened with African American English happened after, happened during the Great Migration period, happened after, slavery and all that stuff, because it was us by ourselves not being allowed to be like full members of society, and stuff just began to like change up and solidify and became what they are now. Like had we been, more integrated the entire time, this thing probably wouldn't even exist. If you look at like different places in South America, for example, more Black folks went to South America than they did to North America. You look at a country like Brazil, like 55, 56% of people self-identify as having some form of African ancestry, but there's not a difference in the Portuguese that Black people speak versus the white Brazilian speak, or the lighter skinned Brazilians or whatever. That has a lot to do with there never being like some form of like ways of keeping people like so separate, keeping them from away from each other, from not integrating and everything. That whole mejora la raza, like where you're supposed to try to like breed your darkness out of yourself and all that, like, and the whole deal with the caste systems and everything like that. That was like, those were people interacting with each other like that.
Right.
That way their language continued to evolve, like not apart, but like all together. Therefore, there is no, Brazilian American or Black American, or was Black Brazilian port. I don't even know what you would call it. That's the thing. I can't even like try to come up with a term for it because like it doesn't exist.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I can't. Right, it doesn't exist. I can't think of what you would possibly try to call that either. Well, I guess my next question, another elephant in the room question. But we touched on this a little bit earlier too, about fluency. As long as you have fluency, it doesn't sound messy. It doesn't sound kind of ridiculous. So let's say we're in a situation where redlining also to the minuscule degree affected poor whites as well. So we have poor white families growing up in predominantly Black neighborhoods their entire life. This is the story that you always hear in your comments. I grew up around Black people my whole life, so this is how I talk. Is it more of a fluency thing? Like, is that what we're calling out? Like, hey, yeah, I believe you that you did grow up in this neighborhood. I believe that you did grow up around these people, but you you're still not nailing the language. You're still kind of in between.
Yeah.
Or is it like they shouldn't speak it? What do you think on that?
So like so there's like, so you have the people that are like true African American English speakers that, you know, are not black. I mean, that they've always been there. Like everybody knows like probably a few people that, you know, fit exactly that category. And African American English is not exclusive to black people. That is like one of the things that I need to start, or that everyone starts to like need to make more clear. Like it's not exclusive to us, even though it's predominantly spoken by us, and not all black people speak it. But to talk about like non-black people who speak it, like that grew up in the communities and grew up around it and everything like that, it's like, and regards to fluency, like we can tell, like you can hear, like there are people that are fluent in English where you can tell it's not their first language, like, and
right.
Some of them, in regards to African American English, like there are people that turn it up. You know what I mean? Like, okay, cool. You grew up around black people. Why are you at 11 all the time? Like, I don't talk like that on an 11 all the time. You know, like I know plenty of black women that, you know, like occasionally sound like "Whoa, Vicky," but they don't sound like "Whoa, Vicky" 24/7. Like,
right.
You know, there's. Like, so it's like, why are you always turning this up? Which goes to the, you know, whole element of like, are you just doing this, you know, to exploit your skin color and your proximity to black people to, you know, get something else out of it, you know, to get, you know, some follows, some sort of clout, some sort of deal, whatever is going on. I think that's the main issue that I have. And also those particular people doing stuff like that, it's like they're not advocating for, you know, the native speakers of the language. Like, you know, where's your video talking about it's okay for anybody to speak like this? You shouldn't be judging people that speak like this. Those videos are non-existent. Like,
right.
You've got what's dude's name? Tom Hanks song. You got Colin Hanks faking that Jamaican patois accent. Like, where's his video telling, you know, people that actually do talk like that? You know, where's his video advocating for those people saying that it's completely fine, you know, to talk that way? It's non-existent because he's just out there trying to get that paper. So...
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And somebody is asking in the comments, do you think that fluency grants you access to the community or the culture? But I think we just kind of answered that.
Nah.
Absolutely not. Yeah, no. It really shouldn't. And I really do kind of hate when white folk compare being poor to being black innately. Like, I grew up poor on the South Side too, blah, 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 blah. I know what it's like. It's like, but that isn't black. All black people aren't just poor on the South Side. That's not. But exactly. How does that make you, you know, kind of relate to us exactly? Like, that's not a fair.
Exactly. Like, I didn't grow up poor, nothing like that. Like, and I still talk like this. My mom talks like that. Like, a bunch of people in my family talk like that. A bunch of folks with college degrees talk like that. Like, my mom, like, college graduate. My aunt, like, or her sister, college graduate. My grandmother, her mother, college graduate. And we all sound like we all got different versions of African American English that we be talking. So it's like, it's not like a poor thing. You know what I mean? There are people like that are poor and have like, and grew up poor or whatever, that talk like this. But like, yo, it's not like you can't extrapolate that and put that on everybody or use that as your excuse. Like, if you think it's cool, just say you think it's cool and move on. Like, you don't have to try to justify it with like, oh, you know, like, I'm from the streets, yo. Yeah. Like, I grew up on such spot. You know what I mean? We've been here forever. Like, this, I got a picture with all these black people in it. Yeah. This is my friend. Right. Like, so you don't need to prove it.
Exactly. You don't. I got a buddy of mine that grew up with, and we still real close, like love each other's families and stuff. And like, yeah, he did grow up in the hood, and he grew up around black people. More specifically, he grew up around black people. He lives around black people right now. All his neighbors are black, and he speaks African American English every single day because that's what everybody in the neighborhood speaks. Like, there isn't a place for him to go where that's not what they're speaking. And if he didn't mesh into the language, he would be very, very, very out of place.
Yeah.
And
Usually the people that got it like that don't need to show it, don't need to tell us how they got it. Like they don't make a noise. They don't make no noise about it. They just like, yeah, this is how I talk. And that's it.
right. I always think about it like, is if I don't notice you, then that means that you're doing it right. Like if it just comes through fluent and I don't have to think like, what the hell did you just say? Like then I think I think it's more legit. But something we're kind of touching on a little bit is the black scent. So I've seen different linguists go back and forth on whether or not it exists or whether or not, if it does exist, is it being exploited for gain? So is there a particular like pronunciation of words that is indicative of black folk, or I guess just African American English at large, or is there not? Because I think a lot of times when me and you were saying, they turn it up to 11, like that's what we're talking about. It's this fake, exaggerated, like minstrelly version of like what a black person is supposed to be like, and it's almost an over dramatized, like I don't know, I guess black scent, but it just feels like a way that people pronounce things, but they pronounce them much longer and louder. So I mean, what do you think about that? Is the black scent real, or is it?
So there definitely is a black scent, at least in my opinion. Like that is indicative of a speaker of African American English. As far as people using it, it's like, so it goes to fluency. For example, like if you take like the word FO, like, or for FOR, for, right? So occasionally like we pronounce that like fo, but occasionally we pronounce that like pho. Yeah. So like, when is it fo and when is it pho? Like, and you'll notice people that are like, oh yeah, they say fo. And it's like fo, 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 when sometimes they should be saying pho. And it's like, why are you talking it like that? That's not how we say it. Like, or you notice that people get hold of a phrase. This especially happens, with slang, which is, I meant to touch on this when we were talking about slang a little bit, but like every language has slang. Mm-hmm. Every single one has slang as a different way of saying whatever. And a lot of times, like a wider spoken language will take stuff from a more marginally spoken language and use that stuff as slang. An example of that happening in a different country, for example, is I'll use another Spanish example because I know Spanish. So like there's a part of Spain where when you say you like something in Spanish, you say like me gusta. But there's a part of Spain where the people say me mola. And like people, like the wider population of Spain started saying me mola, like as a cooler way to say me gusta, or they'll even say stuff like mola vestido, like I like that dress, where it's like, oh, that dress is cool. So that's an example of, a different, wider spoken variant of a language, taking something from a smaller variant and using that. It happens a lot with African American English and general English because, like, I mean, we create the culture, we create like the excitement behind what we say, and people want a taste of that, but they don't have the fluency, and they take it and they use it in like all kinds of contexts that it wasn't meant for, or that we weren't using it in, and it just starts to sound off and weird and everything like that. And then it's like, why are you saying it like that? Like, that's not how we say it, whatever. Like, sometimes it continues to build and build and build, and it just becomes the way everybody says it. Sometimes it fades away. Like, what was that word? Like, on fleek, for example. Like it got ridiculous and it faded away because white folks wore it out. You know? They
Right.
was
Yeah.
using it for everything. Like they was using it for a bunch of stuff it should have never been used for and overusing everything. And now it's gone. R.I.P.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. I don't know if you saw that tweet. I forget who the person was. It was like kind of a religious right wing pundit. And she said, she tweeted something along the lines of, Jesus Christ is going to spin the block for me.
I saw that.
Yeah, and black folk collectively, like the best tweet that I saw, and it's really interesting. Like a lot of, or I guess like TikTok that I saw, like a lot of the videos. Some of my favorite videos is when black folk just it'll be the same words, but they say it a little. There's a little bit of a different like emphasis or pitch. Which we didn't even get a chance to get into that, but I guess I'll do it right now because this woman stitches into it and she's like, "Is Jesus Christ going to spin the block for me, or is he going to spin the block for me?" Because those are two different situations, and if you don't know the difference, you shouldn't be saying this. And
Exactly.
as soon as right, like it's just kind of wild to think of. It's like, oh, I guess people don't innately know this kind of thing. It's like meme vernacular as opposed to lasting change to the language. Yeah, there's a lot of like kind of like, I mean, I don't know. If I see another Target shirt with the word "slay" on it, I'm gonna freak out. Like, you know, it's things like that. It's just like one word kind of plucked out of like out of like a phrase, and that's what I think is like.
Yeah,
Is
and then
the
they
most
got the nerve
annoying,
to
like
tell you
on
when you
fleek.
should use it.
Right, that's not the way that you should. Not everything can be on fleek. Like
Yeah.
you shouldn't be saying that.
Yeah, I read. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say I was gonna ask you if you what's kind of like, because I know you've done some videos on them, but like what's the strangest one? Like that spin the block of Jesus Christ one was the like popped in my head. But let's like what's kind of like the strangest corporate flub with AAE that you've heard?
Yeah, it is still. I did a video on it like over a year ago now, and it's still like the most messed up, ridiculous one I've ever seen. Was the Nike ad where it was like flex that clap back. I still can't believe that made it out into the world. Like that was on TV.
That's so wild.
Or no, it wasn't Nike. It was Beats. It was Apple Beats.
Oh,
It was like there was like a
flex
girl
that clap.
dancing.
Yeah, flex that clap back. I forgot. I was talking. She's jumping into the comments. I was talking to my wife about it because we work in advertising, and she's a commercial film producer. So she was like, there would have been at least 4 or 5 people in the way of this copy getting out. Like they had to go through rooms of people, and no one stopped them. Like no, not one person stopped. It was like, hey, yeah, that's not.
No black folks in the room.
They've got no black folk in the room. Like that's that's not what a clapback is. You can't flex a clapback. Like, I mean, flex that clap. But just buying headphones wouldn't be a clapback. I guess it could be a flex, but like, it was just so much that was wrong with it. Do you got another one that you could think of?
I'm trying to think. There's like I haven't done that series in a while. Part of the reason I haven't made more videos in that series is because a lot of people, especially on TikTok, were like, "Hey, stop explaining stuff to white folks," and I was like, part of me is part of me like still wants to do it, but like at the same time, I can respect that somebody might try to use it as a teaching aid or whatnot, and like I don't know. And I also talked about this as well when I was talking to Dr. Hearn, and I was like, I have this series where I correct some African American English, and she was like, if it's something like particularly egregious or something like that, like I would do it. But otherwise, like you don't need to be like instructing people. For example, back during the whole Ebonics fiasco, there was a group or whatever that took out that poster, the full page ad in the New York Times that said, "I has a dream." And I was, which is, and it's like, dude,
I forgot about that.
Don't nobody say I has a dream. Ain't no black folks say I has a dream. you know, so like, something like that. Yeah, we got to talk about it. But like, some of like the corporate snafus and whatnot, like it makes me cringe. But like, in the back of my head, I'm like, you know what? Like, it's better to just like point at it and laugh than just like make a whole, okay, this is how you properly need to say that and all, because I recognize that on this app and on social media with with people farming our stuff, for their own game, that, maybe I should keep my mouth shut as far as this is how we actually say
it. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we've seen so many ads that start off in another country and then just get translated into English, and they just like, it's like they use Google Translate to do it, and they didn't have a native speaker in the room to check. And you see it, I see it a lot with like perfume ads and stuff like that, like these French companies, and they translate and the sentence is bonkers. It's like, let the ocean overwhelm upstairs, and you're like, what were you trying to say? Like, sexy sentence that they said there, but it's like they don't, it's like they can't figure it out. So I kind of agree with that. Like, we don't have to teach them everything. Like, we can just let a couple of things go. But as far as being, so on this show, it's a anti-racism podcast, and we like to give actionable items at the end of the day. So as far as like supporting, well, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I almost feel like if there's been like a reclaiming of one, professionalism, but not code switching. I've seen that kind of be like more of a thing, like, hey, listen, this is how I talk, and you hired me 10 years ago, and this is how I talked then, this is how I'm gonna talk now, and I still do my work the same way. Like, I don't code switch at work. Like, it's fine, and it's always been fine. But as far as what people can do, is there any actionable thing that somebody can do about this language? Is there any, I guess, like for Black folk that are more interested in it, is there any resources that they can, look into, read, or do you have any recos for that? And white folks who are anti-racist that are like, yo, I want to support the reclamation of it's being mainstream in the Black community. What can I do? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah. So like, as far as books and recommendations and everything, like, the book you mentioned before, Talking Back, Talking Black, by John McWhorter, that's an excellent one. Also like a pretty like quick read. There's an audiobook of it as well. Talking and Testifying by, of course, I'm going to forget every single author's name, but that's a good one. Talking and Testifying. What's another one? Spoken Soul, which is by Rickford, and both of the Rickfords, like John Rickford and his son. Whose name I forget everybody's name, but Spoken Soul. So those are some great books you can read. I've got like a link in my bio that has like a list of some of the different books on African American English you can look at, and that is for everybody, for not just for Black folks, for everybody. You want to like do some more research on it and like look at the language, because it'll help you realize some stuff, some of the underworkings of the language that maybe you didn't realize existed. As far as like actionable item for white people, and black people that don't think it's a thing and, you know, are super against it, because a lot of my biggest detractors like are the same skin color as me. Is like, you know, just have respect for it. Just like have respect for the way people talk and everything. Like it's easy when you believe you're the expert on something because you do it all the time. For example, like driving. Lots of people rate themselves as a better driver than they actually are. I'm guilty of this. I'm guilty of this, right? Because you drive like every day, like you learned how to drive,
right.
you know, you went through the classroom, you did like all the hours with your permit and everything, you got your license, you do it all the time, you occasionally have to like go take a quick test or something like that. Like because you do it all the time, you feel that you are just an expert in the field. Like, but you know, you're just driving to and from work and like to your friend's house and like all these other places around the city. You're not like a professional driver or anything like that. Like there are other people that actually study, you know, the act of driving that are like actually experts in the field. Just because you do it all the time doesn't mean you know everything, you know? And so like, when the people that actually look at the thing say like, yo, this is a real thing, like, and to have respect for it, you just need to like stop trying to say, well, I've been driving for 20 years. Okay, but like, are you a professional driver? You know, like, do you have all this extra stuff with it? Like, what have you done aside from go back and forth to work and the grocery store and the gym all the time? You know, like, if we say it's a thing, like if there's a preponderance of evidence showing you that it's a thing, just like have respect for it, you know. A lot of people like hear something that's different from what they have been used to hearing, what they grew up hearing, you know, from, you know, the people that were around them, and they choose to judge. And it's not just, you know, African American English, you know, people that have like a heavy Southern accent, you know, like feel some of the same. Some of the same levels of discrimination that we do sometimes. So it's like having respect for the way people talk and recognizing that, you know, you were in a bubble like that just happened to be a language bubble, you know, that existed because of, you know, the people you were raised around, what you heard on television, you know, but that there are other valid ways of speaking like exist, and you just need to have respect for them. Like, if you can understand it, you're good.
Right, yeah. And actually, that's something that somebody always told me. I can't think of the terminology. You might be able to step in for me. It's like prescriptive versus descriptive.
Right.
So, like, English is a prescriptive language?
So those are the two studies in the field of linguistics. So you have prescriptive linguistics and you have descriptive linguistics. So descriptive is what nearly everybody studies. If you take a college course in linguistics, you're going to study like descriptive linguistics, which is just studying how the language is being used. Prescriptive is saying this is how the language should be used. This is how you should say, you know, X, Y, Z. This is how this, you know, phrase should be constructed. This is how this word should be pronounced. Descriptive is saying, hey, these folks over here have been pronouncing it like this for like 100 years. Like, so, yeah, like be a descriptive. Like everybody is a descriptivist by nature. You know, when you're a kid learning your native language, you don't care about the way you're supposed to pronounce the word for. Like, you just hear a bunch of people saying fo. Like, I got four of them. Like, oh, he got four of them too. And then, like, that kid is going to grow up saying, I got four of them. You know, that's the way it's going to work. Like, that is descriptive. When that kid goes to school and their teacher is like, four, not fo, four, that is descriptive. So...
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a buddy of mine was helping. He's a journalism PhD candidate, and he was saying, he was like my explanation of English is if you can understand it, it's correct. Like, we don't need to like grammar Nazis or things like that. He's like, if you can understand what they're saying and it doesn't make you pause and not understand or miss their meaning. If your language is able to be misunderstood, now we're starting to have a problem where you can say that they're speaking the language wrong. But if they were speaking and you're able to understand what they're saying, there doesn't seem to be a problem. And it kind of feels like he was on that other side of that analysis of the language. I'm just thinking of my 2-year-old. You're right. She says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and that's because that's how we talk around the house, and so that's how she learned the word.
Yeah, exactly. So we don't need more prescriptivists telling us how to say something. We just need people accepting of people. Because at the end of the day, it's like the way you think about the way people pronounce words or certain words that they use. You know, I've got several videos on the word conversate, for example. Like a lot of people hate it. But you don't really hate that word. You just hate the people who are associated with using that word. You know. That's where it's going to. Like if Bill Nye the Science Guy, made a video and he was like, oh well, me and the rest of the scientists went back to the lab and we conversated for about 20 minutes and we decided that we needed to, just give it a little bit more time. Like, if he was doing that and other people were doing it, all of a sudden conversate would slowly become acceptable. But because because people mostly associate that with, maybe some folks on Judge Judy, who happen to look like me and you, it's like, oh, conversate, that's not a word. It's like, I get sent so many videos about conversate now. And it's like, I want to attack every single one. And I do a few months, every few months, I'm like, conversate, not a word. Let's talk about conversate again. But at the end of the day, it's like, it's not the language or the word you have a problem with. It's what you think of the people that are using that language and that word. That's where it all comes back to having respect. If you have respect for the way someone sounds, you are more likely to have respect for that person.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Somebody just dropped in the comments, inevitable and compromise are the two words. I don't say that's the way people typically say them. And I cannot think of a different way to say those words at all. Maybe write it phonetically. I can give you a little anecdote of when I was in middle school and I got bullied by the director of a play because I could not pronounce. Okay, so the thing that you write with and then the thing that you put on your shirt. Yeah. Those two words, I could not. Those were the same word to me. I would say pen. For everything. That's a pen. You pen it on there. And then he was like, no, it's pin. And I still, to this day, in my 30s, have to consciously think of pronouncing that word like that because my inkling is to change that I sound to an E sound, and that's called something, and I don't know what it's called.
So yeah, I don't know the terminology on that one either, but I can tell you why that is. So Sweet. As children, any child, any baby has the ability to hear and differentiate between any sounds that exist in language. But as you get older, you begin to just zero in and focus on only the sounds that you are hearing, from the people that, you're learning your language from, your family, your friends, whatever environment you're raised in. This is why Japanese have such a hard time with R's and L's, because saying R, what's the R? Ringo, for example, apple is Ringo in Japanese, but it's this weird sort of sound that exists somewhere between an R and an L. But they have a hard time hearing the difference between right and light. Same thing with you and pen and pin, right? So, basically, there was no one in their circle that was making the extra sounds that they needed to be able to hear and differentiate between and hone in on. Therefore, they have a trouble, hearing that distinction when somebody's pronouncing, two different R sounds, and they have trouble reproducing it. Just like you have trouble reproducing pin and pen because you most likely grew up around people that pronounce both of those the same and you never got to hone in on what the difference between those two pronunciations are.
Exactly. Like that's how my grandparents talked. Both sides. That's how my parents talked. To me, I was like blown away and like completely embarrassed, but like just blown away that I couldn't hear it, and that was like the thing that sticks out to me the most. As like we ran that line so many times, and I would run out, I would hit my mark, and I would go, and I would say the line, and he would go, "No, it's it's pin," and the whole time I'm like, "That's what I said." And then I asked everybody else, like, I'm like, "Is that what I said?" And they were like, "No," like you said pen, and I was like, "Oh." Are you sure? Because that's the word that I meant. But to me, that's how you always pronounce those things. But I will let you get running here. So for the folks that just walked in or just tuned in or just starting to pay attention, again, what is your name? What do you do? And where can people find you?
So my name is E.K Powell. I go by What's Good English here on TikTok and on Instagram and on YouTube. I have a Twitter, but I'm not active there, so don't worry about that one right now. And I talk about a lot of language-related stuff. I make a lot of videos about African-American English, but I talk about other languages as well, language learning in general. And you'll see some other stuff. Talk about different shows you can watch to help you learn different languages, whatever language you want to. Like I was talking about Spanish last week, but I've also done stuff on like German. Talking about French next week, and yeah, you might see me like cook something as well on my stuff. But mostly language stuff.
Awesome. So all the socials, What's Good English. If you're on the podcast stream, you'll see all the links down below. But EK, I love you, brother. Thank you so much for coming and hanging out with me for a little bit and talking about Black English and all that.
Yeah, it was super fun. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely, man. All right. Peace, y'all.
Yep.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Conscious Environment Podcast. I hope you enjoyed listening to that as much as I enjoyed recording it for you. Thank you again to EK for coming on and talking with me. I feel like I learned so much from you about my own language, which I think is a rare day when somebody's able to say that. So thank you, brother, so much for doing that for me. If you want to support the show financially, there are Cashapp and Venmo links down below, but there's also bonfire links to our merch site if you want to support that way and, pick up a couple of shirts. If you can't support the show financially, I completely understand. If you could, just give us 5 stars, write a review. Also, hit that download button. For some reason, that means a ton in the podcast world. Tell your mama about the show. She'll probably love it. And one more thing that I always want you to remember. Remember, I love you, and you should stay hydrated and drink water. Like right now. Go drink water right now. Okay, I'll see you guys next week.